Hello, I'm Marissa. I am Eat This Not That social media director, and we are about to go live with Lisa Moskovitz, a member of our medical expert board here at Eat This Not That. Lisa is a registered dietitian, certified dietitian nutritionist, and the CEO of New York Nutrition Group, a private nutrition consultancy with more than 20 registered dietitians on staff, with more than a decade of experience in private practice. Lisa also works with the media as a leading nutrition source and provides wellness seminars to corporations across the tri-state area. She's a renowned nutrition expert, and she has a knack for empowering people to make permanent behavioral changes in order to live healthier, more fulfilling lives. And she will be empowering many of us here today, I'm sure. She is going to be answering questions that our followers, hopefully many of you, previously submitted all about food sensitivities. Here she is. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Good. Excited to be here again. And I know this is such a popular subject, and so many people are so curious about food sensitivities to the point where there's a lot of misinformation around it.
Absolutely. And it's a topic that we have not specifically covered in one of these live Q&As here before. So we're so excited to have you and to dive into it. Do you want me to just jump right into these questions?
Sure. I'm ready. You can hit me with your best shot, and we'll go from there.
What food
So that is always the big question. A lot of people confuse the two, and they don't realize like a food sensitivity is very different than an intolerance. When we think about an intolerance, we think of really lactose intolerance, maybe fructose malabsorption, which is another type of intolerance. Some people have sucrose intolerance. And really what it's related to is a lack of an enzyme that's necessary to break down that specific food or type of food. So with lactose intolerance, people find that when they eat most types of dairy, especially dairy that has higher amounts of lactose in it, specifically milk, ice cream, pudding, certain cheeses, yogurt, that it automatically leads to GI upset, discomfort, running to the bathroom, bloating, gas, all the things that we just don't want to deal with ever. Not super fun, especially if you work in an office all day. So that is an intolerance. So it's nothing to do with your immune system. It's purely enzyme related, whereas a sensitivity is more of an immune mediated response. So your body is sort of, when ingesting this food, thinking of it as like a foreign invader, and it has to protect itself. Unlike an allergy, which is similar, it's an IgE, you would do an IgE test to detect food allergies. With food sensitivities, you would do an IgG or IgA test. Unlike food allergies, though, it's not immediate. And that's the tricky part of it, is that with food allergies and even intolerances, you would most likely feel an immediate reaction. With allergies, it could be skin rashes, throat closing. It's a little scarier, obviously a little bit more severe, requires more immediate medical attention most of the time. With sensitivities, it's a delayed response. I mean, you might not notice anything until you're eating a lot of it over time. And it won't be immediately after you eat it for the most part, for most people. Some people do have that immediate response, which just tells us it's a more significant and severe sensitivity. But for many others, you might not have symptoms until the next day, even the day after, and it might only if you eat a certain amount of it. So that's why it gets more confusing. It's so much harder to detect, and that's why a lot of people do turn to testing for it, because otherwise it feels like nearly impossible, like you're taking a shot in the dark and you're just guessing.
Next, someone asked, is it possible to have good gut health?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, what is good gut health? When we look at gut health, because it is a sort of buzzword, and I think it's used a lot as a way to capture attention, and we know it is a hot topic, and it's a very, Googleable word, if that's even a word. Gut health really means that, it's free. You have a digestive system that's free of disease and illness, no major symptoms. You tend to not have any like significant bloating, diarrhea, constipation. On a more micro level, or more of like a scientific level, we're looking at a healthy, balanced microbiome where we have a variety of good bacteria. There's always going to be some bad bacteria in there, but the balance is pretty strong. A lot of good bacteria, things running smoothly, a good strong gut lining to prevent things from kind of entering into our bloodstream and causing like systemic issues. So that's more of like a clinical definition. But the reality is that it's not like there's a test, right? For like your gut, like one specific test for your gut health. It's not like, okay, you take a test, specific thing we look for in your blood, and you have good gut health, you get an A plus. It's not that simple. There could be things happening that we don't realize are happening. And it's not always going to be GI issues that tip us off. Sometimes we have other symptoms that are stemming from gut issues and we don't realize they're connected. So I would say with that question, really like, yes, it is possible. It's possible you could be in the early stages of it and not realize like things are brewing, and you might develop symptoms down the road or issues down the road. I mean, everything has to start somewhere. So, it's great if you feel like you have good gut health and you don't have any issues. And that's really the best case scenario, because we just don't know until something comes up and you're taking all the measures to, protect your gut, which is just eating a variety of plant-based foods, getting a lot of fiber, antioxidants, pre and probiotics in your diet is also another way to do it. A moderately active lifestyle, sleeping well, managing stress, et cetera, et cetera. So those are just some of the broad ways that you can improve and protect your gut.
Next is, I was told I yolk and white, but when eggs,
So it's not, we don't always have like symptoms for everything. So it is possible to not, again, like notice a reaction to something. And it is also possible to react to a component, so for like egg yolks versus egg whites, like it's possible to react to one of those and not both. Some people also say that they tolerate it, which is interesting. I don't really have a real explanation for it. I just know that it's very common that they don't tolerate eggs cooked a certain way, but if it's like in something or cooked again another way, they're fine. They have like no reactions, no issues. Like somebody said, like poached eggs bother them, but a hard-boiled egg doesn't. Makes it, if you think about it, the cooking method isn't even all that different. But for some reason, I think it's just the way that the heat changes the structure of the egg and can kind of disarm it maybe and make it more friendly for our body. But I know that like egg yolks and egg whites, they do tend to be like separate, even though they come in a package together. Our body can react differently to each component, and that's not unusual. So with that, that's a food that is a shame to avoid unless you know for sure you're reacting to it, because it is so nutritious and the yolk is like a multivitamin. So don't throw away those yolks. Eat them if you could tolerate them. And again, make sure you get to the bottom of it.
so interesting.
Mhm.
Does MSG have side effects?
Yeah. So there's limited research on the whole MSG thing. And we know, a lot of times we find it mostly in like Chinese food. I think that's a big source of it. But it can be found other places too. So monosodium glutamate, there's limited research. They haven't really been able to get to the bottom of when people report headaches from it, like why that's really happening. Same thing with artificial sweeteners. We hear that a lot too, that they can contribute to headaches. People get headaches and migraines. We know that, headaches and migraines can be triggered from all different reasons. And sometimes it's stress and hormones, and sometimes it's like tyramine in the diet. Like if we're looking at parts of the diet that can trigger it, we know that tyramine rich foods tend to trigger headaches and even migraines for some people. And there are some supplements that can help. Taking magnesium can be a good one. So basically, one of the theories is just that it like activates neurons in our brain, and that can kind of signal and cause this sort of like reaction to have, again, either a headache or a migraine, depending on your history. And that's really it. There's not a lot of conclusive or, strong evidence to support that it does that or why it's doing that, other than what I just mentioned. Yeah.
Now someone asks, why do raw onions give me migraines?
Yeah. So, and that's going to be similar, maybe it's the sulfur, maybe it's so I think it's everybody does react differently to foods. I mean, and we could see that in a test when we do food sensitivity testing, which is also controversial. They're not always 100% accurate. They're not always the whole picture. Where they don't always even make and break somebody's symptoms. Sometimes we do the test, we eliminate the foods, and the symptoms are still there. Sometimes the foods that come up in the test have, like, you're like, but I've been eating all these foods forever. They've never been an issue for me. I actually have an issue to gluten, not to grapes, but grapes are coming up. So it's a very confusing place. The accuracy and the efficacy of these tests, we need more to say, like, it's not the gold standard to even detect food sensitivities, but everybody is different, and everybody with food sensitivities, because they are a real thing, can have different symptoms, and sometimes it's just the way that it interacts with our, genetic makeup, our gut profile, our, if we have a history of headaches and migraines, it could be easily triggered by certain things and components in food. I know that raw onions, for sure, if you have acid reflux or SIBO or IBS, can be a huge trigger. So if you do have like the lower, even upper GI issues, raw onions are a major offender. But outside of that, I would just say, if you notice a reaction, then that's your body's way of saying, I'm not happy with this food. And good information to have. Whether you completely avoid it is still up to you. If you still want to, test your luck and push push those buttons, then that's your choice. Yep.
Okay. And now, why does cilantro smell and taste like soap to people?
So this is a genetic thing. This is purely genetic. It's some type of variation in like an olfactory receptor site in the body. But it is like, but a good percentage of the population finds this to be the case. Like up to 15% is the statistic. There's also some research and support showing that if you wanted to, which, like, I don't know who really like cares that much about eating cilantro, but if you're like, well, I go out to Mexican all the time and I hate to be the one that's like, no cilantro in the guacamole, then you could do exposure therapy and basically like small amounts of it, like add it in over time. And apparently you can sort of desensitize yourself to that soapy taste. So over time you can actually it won't be as significant and, noticeable if you just like gradually add it into your diet. So that's a little fun fact, but it is completely like genetic related. And it can affect like up to 15% of the population. So
next, why ever heard?
Yeah. So it's food sensitivities can develop like over time, it's because, so there's more awareness around it. We are hearing more about it. We're more aware as a whole, as a society. We have access to, our fingertips on more information, from podcasts to social media so I think there's just more awareness in general, and that's making people pay attention to these things. Food sensitivities can also develop as we get older and based on some other things. So like if we get an illness or infection or, taking a certain medication or some type of there are things that can trigger new symptoms in our body, specifically when it relates to the gut. So some people say, I've never had, even lactose intolerance before. Why am I now having it in my 50s when like I grew up eating all the ice cream and drinking all the milk and never had an issue before? And so it's just, the answer is that our bodies do change. Our balance of good and bad bacteria can change. What we're exposed to, antibiotics, bacterial infections, other illnesses, side effects of medications can all alter our body and shape how we process, how we tolerate certain foods, or how we react to certain foods, and what our immune system is doing. So it's not, unusual, but I do think that at the same time, people are so quick to self-diagnose or like believe in they have a bunch of food sensitivities or they are sensitive to certain foods, when that might not be the case. When it could just be like, for example, you could actually feel lactose intolerant and not tolerate it well when you have like celiac disease. Celiac is a more of a like, you don't tolerate gluten. You're very sensitive to gluten, but it's an autoimmune condition. Your body literally attacks itself when it has any, even like microscopic amount of gluten in the body. So for those populations, completely gluten-free is the only way to be. But that can make you more sensitive to everything else. People can develop other reactions to other foods, but once they kind of give their body a rest, they get the gluten out, and things are even keel, and like we have more of like a stable environment, then they might notice like they tolerate things better.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. Is it possible to cure yourself of lactose?
So I wish that was the case. Unfortunately, it's like I was saying, it's usually only the opposite, unfortunately. Usually, we sort of lose that enzyme, that lactase enzyme, when we're babies. Like we have breast milk or even formula. And so we kind of are able to digest it a little bit more in early periods of life. And then as time goes on, like I mentioned, those factors that can get involved, just aging process in general, it usually gets worse, but it does affect a vast majority of us. Like we're looking at upwards of 60 to 70% of the population have some degree of lactose intolerance. The good news is that there's so many alternatives these days where you can still get your milk, your cheese, your yogurt, your ice cream fix. They have Lactaid is a brand that has all these foods, and they basically add lactase enzyme into the food so that it's digested for you. So it's not necessarily like lactose free. They add the lactose enzyme in there, and then it helps your body break it down much better. And then we know, of course, there's so many like just completely dairy free options with milk, yogurt, ice cream, and all of the above that you could eat. And the big thing we're missing out from dairy that is beneficial is the calcium, the vitamin D, which is important for our bone health and our immune health, iodine, which is really important for our thyroid and metabolism. And then, it can be a good source of protein. And then, of course, yogurt is one of the best sources and the most accessible sources of probiotics. So, but you could get that through lactate versions and dairy-free versions, no problem. So that's the good news. And then again, if you're okay with feeling some symptoms once in a while, that is your choice. So it's not like super dangerous or deadly. It's just more of like, what is your comfort level? And maybe like don't have some ice cream at the office when you're sitting there all day or about to like go on stage, like just kind of, be smart around that. But again, totally your choice, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. That always a pleasure.
Thank you again. I appreciate it. And yeah, and anyone that has more questions or anything can follow me. And hopefully this was illuminating and everyone learned a little bit. So thank you again. And then our company website is nynutritiongroup.com. Yep.
So
thank you.
Guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.